Hi, my name is Raniyah Copeland, and I am the president and CEO of the Black AIDS Institute, affectionately known as BAI. BAI is the only uniquely and unapologetically Black HIV think and do tank in America. For over 2 decades, we have worked tirelessly in our pursuit of our mission to end the Black AIDS epidemic, and our advocacy extends beyond a single virus. We know very clearly that health justice is racial justice. And as such, we radically address not just the medical and social determinants of health, but all of the deeply connected systems of oppression that contribute to the overall wellness of Black people. We source our capacity building, our mobilization efforts, our policy and advocacy efforts from Black leaders and communities across the country, and provide high quality direct HIV services and linkages to over 2,000 Black Angelenos per year. On behalf of our board and our staff, I am so excited to welcome you to The Blacker the Plan, Our People, Our Problem, Our Solution. This is a thoughtful and relevant three-part virtual speaker series hosted by Black AIDS Institute and our guest panel speakers. Each installment features community advocates, educators, and health experts who can uniquely speak to the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 and systemic oppression is having on Black communities' wellness, particularly in this moment, particularly today. This episode is a 45-minute virtual experience that we're really excited to bring you into. I want to thank Gilead Sciences for providing the incredible and unapologetically Black series of conversations for our people and featuring people that matter to us. I also want to give a huge thank you and shout out to the Black Love docuseries for partnering with us to amplify and promote this episode of The Blacker the Plan. Black Love is dedicated to cultivating and deepening community throughout the diaspora, and we look forward to being able to do more for our people together. If you guys haven't already, please make sure that you use our hashtag as we engage in this conversation, which is hashtag the Blacker the Plan. You got it, the Blacker the Plan. It's like the Blacker the berry. Sorry, because I don't hear but I'm sure you guys all understand. I'm really excited to introduce our talent for today, our amazing speakers, our amazing activists and advocates. The first is George M. Johnson. George M. Johnson is an HIV and LGBTQ plus activist and writer based in New York. He has written on race, gender, sex, and culture for Essence, The Advocate, BuzzFeed News, Teen Vogue, and more than 40 other national publications. He's a columnist for Afropunk and has appeared on BuzzFeed's AM2DM, as well as MSNBC. All Boys Aren't Blue is his debut best-selling new book that is being developed into a new show. George, I'm so excited to have you. Congratulations again on your amazing new book and the series that's coming out from it. So we're really excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Our second panelist for this amazing conversation is Nikole Hannah-Jones. Nikole Hannah-Jones covers racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and has spent years chronicling the ways official policy has created and maintains racial segregation in housing and schools. Her deeply personal reports on the Black experience in America offer a compelling case for greater equity. Nikole is the creator and lead writer of the New York Times major multimedia initiative, the 1619 Project, named for the year the first enslaved Africans arrived in America. The project features an ongoing series of essays and art on the relationship between slavery and everything from social infrastructure and segregation to music and sugar, all by Black American authors, activists, journalists, and more. Miss Hannah-Jones wrote the project's introductory essay, which ran under the powerful headline, "Our Democracy's Founding Ideals Were False When They Were Written. Black Americans haven't fought to make them true. Black Americans have fought to make them true." And the essay earned her first Pulitzer Prize for commentary. Nikole, we're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here with everyone tonight.
All right, so I'm gonna get into it. I think you all are, when we thought about this series, you all's names popped immediately into our head because of the commentary that you guys have, but also the huge amount of activism and advocacy that you guys have done. And so I think this is gonna be great. So my first question is really kind of laying the stage for where we are right now. So, Black Americans are simultaneously dealing with the racial pandemic of America that has been here since 19, and a viral pandemic, both of which are disproportionately impacting us. This speaks to the various covert and overt ways anti-Black racism has transformed and evolved since slavery. Um, Nikole, I would love for you to answer this first. What do you think, based off of this, what do you think are the most pressing issues that Black people should be advocating for right now?
So thank you for that question. And it's easy for me to answer because I just published an essay yesterday speaking exactly to that. And the essay is called What is Owed? And it says, if Black lives are truly to matter in this country, this nation has to pay its debts. So clearly, addressing police violence is critical for our communities, and not just police violence that ends in death, but all of the brutality that Black Americans face from policing, the surveillance that Black people face from policing, mass incarceration. So these are crucial, but our experience demands so much more than that. The very least we should expect from our country is that agent of the state can't murder us without having to face consequences. So we should ask for that, but that's not enough. What I argue is that if we truly are to reach equality, we have to have economic justice. And that means that we have to deal with the wealth gap between Black and white Americans. What the data shows is Black American households have $10 of wealth for every $1, or excuse me, 10 cents of wealth for every $1 that white households have. And Black households with children have 1 cent of wealth for every dollar that white households have. And that's because of a generational ability of white Americans to accumulate wealth and a generational obstacles to Black Americans being able to accumulate wealth. And what I basically argue is that almost everything that makes life hard, lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to healthy communities, lack of ability to send your children to a quality school, and the type of policing that poor communities experience, much of that can be laid at the feet of our wealth gap. So I'm hoping that as we are in this maybe transformative moment, that we actually have the courage to ask for what is really needed, which is restitution to the 40 million descendants of American slavery.
You say restitution. Tell me a little bit about what you think about reparations within that, right? I love, this kind of concept, like the least we can do is not be killed, right? That's the least that y'all should be doing, is not killing us and having it videotaped to be played on social media over and over and over again. But how do you kind of connect restitution to reparations, and what do you think the appetite is for folks to have this conversation right now?
So I'm using the word restitution as a synonym for reparations. That's what I mean. I use restitution because I think so many of us, and even a significant percentage of people in Black communities, have such a visceral reaction to the word reparations. When we hear it, we automatically say, well, I don't know about that. So I'm using restitution to act, to hope that by using a different word, people actually listen to the message of economic justice. So it's the same thing. When I say restitution, and in the essay, I call for reparations by name at the end of the essay, I'm talking about massive investment into segregated Black communities and segregated Black schools. I'm talking about a sincere commitment to enforce existing civil rights laws. And most importantly, I'm talking about cash payments to the descendants of the enslaved to make up for that wealth gap.
I'm here for it. The government got my account information, so
exactly. They know exactly where we are. They've proven that with COVID-19. And the government has also proven that that excuse that we simply can't afford to pay restitution, within a matter of days, this federal government was able to pass a nearly $3 trillion stimulus for American, including a $500 billion of money for businesses, in which the government's telling us they don't even have to tell us how they spent it. So we no longer can abide by that excuse that we can't come up with the money, because we clearly can.
Absolutely. George, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. What do you think are the most pressing issues that Black people should be advocating for right now are? And I'm also really interested, George, in what you believe is the most effective way we as Black people can advocate for ourselves right now. We've seen a huge amount of uprisings that are happening across the country, right? And we've seen, I think, some monumental change from that. But what are other ways, and please kind of elaborate on physically protesting as well, but what are the ways that we as Black people can advocate for ourselves right now? And what is the most effective way to advocate for Black people overall right now?
Okay, so when I think about like what's the most pressing issues, I think Nikole, hit the nail on the head with what she said, because realistically, like as Black people, we're looking at issues that all intersect one another. And so when you talk about healthcare, education, economics, it's like almost like every single system impacts us much differently. So I think that kind of then goes into like, if all of these things are the pressing issues, then what does our advocacy have to look like? What does our activism have to look like moving forward? Oftentimes people see one issue as a singular issue, and then that's where they put most funds, most energy, most efforts. And so police brutality, it's like people are like, that's the top issue. And it's like, well, police brutality is a byproduct of capitalism, which, because clearly it's like if a city is getting $2 billion in funding, and why is the police budget 1 billion of the city's $2 billion, right? And so it's like you have to realize these systems are all talking to one another. And so our advocacy has to look like what these systems are looking like. So it's like we can't just fight police brutality, right? So it's like when people were worried that the Target had got burned down, it was like, no, that's necessary that we burn down structures that are the faces of capitalism, because policing is a face of capitalism. Target funds the police. There are a lot of stores that fund the police. So our advocacy has to look like, not only are we pushing back against police brutality, but we are also pushing back against the supporters of the police, the people who fund the police, the governments that fund the police, the state that funds the police. The really thing, or the hard part about activism or advocacy, is some people just don't know what to do. And so you have a lot of people who are energized, but nowhere to put their energy. And so what I'm always teaching people is that activism and advocacy, it's not like a 1-lane road. It's more like a 6-lane highway. And so if writing is your form of activism, then write. If speaking is your form of activism, then speak. If protesting is your form of activism, then protest. But activism, it doesn't look like one singular thing. And so we have to stop treating it as such, because you'll have a lot of times where people are like, oh, but y'all not out here on the streets. It's like, yeah, but some people physically cannot be out there on the streets, and that's okay. But if you can't physically be out there on the streets, celebrities, who I'm talking to, then you need to, like they say, open up your purse and fund the people who are on the streets. And so a big part of advocacy is when you can't do certain things, but we have put you in certain places of power because of the capital you have, it is your duty as a Black person to use some of that capital to fund those people and fund those organizations that are doing the advocacy work. And so what I'm hoping moving forward is that from this, one, we have a death of celebrity culture, which is also kind of happening as we watch the publishing industry be kind of called out, and basically every facet of every industry that has disrespected a Black person has been called out. And so now what I'm hoping is more celebrities become more engaged with the fact that when you amass this much capital in a system that's built against us, we need you to start redistributing your wealth in a way that gets these organizations that are feeding the homeless, and gets these organizations that are housing people who are Black, and any organizations that's dedicated to education, any organizations that's dedicated to economic inequality for Black people, that y'all should be the main funders of those things to bring our community kind of up out of those situations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Leading a Black-led nonprofit who focuses on an intersectional, HIV is such an intersectional issue. It was really about these various systems of oppression that are fueling HIV in our community. And at Black AIDS Institute, when we talk about ending HIV now, we're talking about ending mass incarceration, we're talking about ending homophobia, transphobia, we're talking about ending intimate partner violence, all of these experiences that we as Black people have that ultimately end up in increased cases of HIV in our community. And then not just even increased cases, but that we're less likely to benefit from these amazing medications that we have that can really ensure people who are living with HIV can live long, healthy lives. And so I'm here for the call out around us kind of supporting us and that we as Black communities can do that. And thank you to folks who've been doing that across the country, and let's kind of keep that up. Nikole, when I saw your newest article come out yesterday, I fangirled. I was like, yes, this is exactly what we're about to talk about tomorrow. And I was laying in bed reading it. And in your article, you kind of talk about this history of advocacy that's happened in Black America. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of what you think? What are the most effective ways, particularly based off of our past, right? Black folks have a long history of advocacy. We have a long history of being resilient. How do you think that we need to advocate now to really sustain this change, to propel this change to mean meaningful kind of freedom for Black folks?
Yeah, it's complicated because we have always been in the streets protesting, we've been behind closed doors protesting, but unfortunately in a country where we're 13% of the population, we are dependent upon convincing enough white Americans that this is the right thing to do in order to get change. We have to convince enough white Americans in Congress. We have to convince enough white Americans who have power in our communities, who run the businesses, who run the organizations. So I think what has been so powerful about this moment, and oftentimes when we've seen great progress, it has come because of a particularly egregious violent act against Black people. That, and I write about this in the piece, that what's different about George Floyd is we actually did witness a lynching. I don't believe in calling things lynching unless they're lynching. I don't think you use the word lynching as a metaphor, but what we witnessed was actually, if you look up a textbook definition of a lynching, that's what it was. And it took something, Ahmaud Arbery wasn't enough. Breonna Taylor wasn't enough. Michael Brown wasn't enough. Freddie Gray wasn't enough. Go down your list. It had to take that white officer kneeling on a Black man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds to get enough white folks to be like, okay, maybe we should do something about this. And that's where we've always been. So we've had to always be kind of the conscious of this country, putting our actual physical bodies on the line in the street, sometimes burning things down to make enough white Americans decide that they want to act in concert with us to make this country closer to the ideals of democracy. So when I think about what do we have to do, we have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to keep I loved what George said is we all have our roles to play. I'm a journalist. I can't be out in the street protesting, but my role is to write and to give people the language, to talk about what needs to happen, to give people the history to understand where we've been and what needs to happen. And we all have to play our distinct roles. For some people that will be writing checks. But as soon as the public pressure lets up, the folks who need to change and do things are going to stop. So we cannot allow, there's those of us who will do our work in different ways, but we cannot allow that public pressure to let up. That means writers have to keep writing. People who are activists have to keep being out in those streets. Those who have money have to keep funding the movement because they're just waiting for us to get tired. That's how it's always worked in this country. They wait for us to get tired. I'm a little concerned actually about how quickly some of these superficial changes are occurring. Now, all of a sudden we can get Juneteenth off. Now, all of a sudden, NASCAR can realize that maybe we shouldn't let people fly the Confederate flags. It makes me worry that they feel if they just throw a couple bones, if they pass a few superficial changes, then our eye will get off of the ball and we'll be satisfied. And so we have to make sure that we show that we're not satisfied. Yes, those are nice changes, but the structural changes is what we're really going for, and we have to keep pushing for that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. At BAI, we talk a lot about overt and covert anti-Black racism. I would love for the both of you guys to talk more about racism in America and what role, if any, we as Black folks should be actively playing in dismantling this anti-Black racism that impact every sector of our lives?
Yeah, I think it's necessary to call it out when you see it and not be afraid of what the call out, I guess, will do. And it's so interesting, I think, in the sense of like where we're about to be in a couple of months with the presidential election, for instance. And it's like this whole overt versus covert thing is like actually coming up a lot between the two candidates, because it's like, on one hand, it's like we clearly know what 45 is, right? Like he has made it very, very clear numerous times. But your other candidate, it's like when he tells us like if we don't vote for him, then we ain't black. It's like that seems a little anti-black, right? Like that's not something you should even you shouldn't even think that you can say that to us, right? But there's a fear in calling that particular racism out because of what's at stake, right? And I think we have always had to live at this place of either our death being instantaneous or our death being by 1,000 paper cuts. Or we're always living at when everybody else get to vote, we got to vote for the lesser of two evils. We got to vote for who gonna harm us the least. We got to vote out of poverty, or we got to vote in many ways like we're voting for like our individual situation, and sometimes we're not voting for our collective situation and thinking about like, well, what communities get harmed if I vote for said person or a thing like that. And so I think part of like calling out anti-blackness is also recognizing how you feed into anti-blackness. And so many of us, and there are a lot of us who have to, like, we're writing and doing the teaching of a lot of people who don't understand anti-blackness, because people understand racism. Like racism is the buzzword that everybody understands because it's much easier to call out. It's harder to call out anti-blackness because anti-blackness is like how those systems all connect and how they all talk to each other and how they all work together. And it's like, yeah, I can understand when the white lady grabs her purse and pulls it in real close when I walk by her. What I don't understand or I can't see is how the school to prison pipeline works and how that school to prison pipeline has literally affected millions of us, or how mass incarceration works, right? What I can't understand is I want Breonna Taylor's captors arrested, but I also want to abolish the police. And so it's a very complex thing anytime you start talking about anti-blackness, because it's globally rooted. And that's the other thing too. A lot of people just think it's like an American thing. And it's like, well, if you know the history of anti-blackness, the whole world dumps on Black people in many, many ways, right? And so a lot of it is going to be not only just calling it out, but also teaching people what it actually is. Because a lot of people just don't understand what that term is outside of what's racism. Racism is almost simple when you really get to it. Like, it's not complex. It's like, you hate me because of the color of my skin. Anti-blackness is like, not only do I hate you, I'm going to build systems that hate you. And not only am I going to build systems that hate you, I'm going to cage you. And not only am I going to cage you, I'm going to use your labor and pay you less. And not only am I going to do that, I'm going to also, when you travel the world, they're going to treat you like crap too, because I told them to treat you like crap because of how whiteness works. And so it's like, it's a much more complex thing. But I think we're now in a space where people are ready to receive the information, which is much different than where we've been, I think, in the past.
Nikole, I would love to hear from you on this. What role, if any, do Black people have in dismantling anti-Black racism?
So I don't think we have any role in dismantling a system we didn't create. We don't have the power to dismantle anti-Black racism. We didn't create it. We certainly don't benefit from it. And I think what has been so frustrating always in periods like this is people, white Americans, and let's be clear, the way that anti-Blackness is different than racism is you can be racist against a lot of different groups of people, but other groups of color are also can be racist against Black Americans in particular. And so we need to understand when we're talking about anti-Blackness, we are talking about this as practiced by white people, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans. And it is a specific form of racism that is derived from a country that was built on a racial caste system in which Black people were literally not considered humans and property, are on the bottom. And everyone else who comes to this country and is of color finds their place within that hierarchy where they aren't white, but they damn sure aren't Black, and try to make sure that they never get confused. So I think it is frustrating to constantly be asked, well, how do we fix this? Y'all didn't need us to make the system. You didn't ask our opinion when you were created the inequality and the segregation and the brutality. So don't look to us now to undo it. The same way you figured out how to create it. We as a country sent somebody to the moon. We can figure this out. We created the architecture. We can undo the architecture. I think what's more important to me is, when we talk about covert versus overt, and even the kind of facile way that we talk about racism, I personally don't care if you like Black people or not. I want to know, what are the actions? So how are the actions and the structures actually inhibiting Black life, making Black life harder? We tend to want to have these conversations about the racist of the week. Who said something racist? Irrelevant to me. You can hate me all you want. Stay out of my way. Don't block my opportunities. Don't do me harm. And your personal feelings are really not that important. So I hope that we can really shift the language to the structures. I live in the hood. I said it. I mean, look, I'm in Bed-Stuy. This is just the way it is. It's been crazy. It's been so crazy. So one way I explained this to a white person the other day, that you can not personally be racist, if such a thing exists, but move into a neighborhood that was built through that is white because of redlining, and where the housing values are worth more because of redlining, and that has certain types of schools because of redlining. And you don't personally have to be racist or not to benefit from the structures of racism. And that's what we really need to be dismantling, are those structures, and focusing on that. And we know what to do to dismantle them. It is really about building that political will amongst those who have the power to do it. And this is why I think the focus on just policing is too simple, because it costs white people nothing to say, don't kill Black people in the street. That costs you nothing. Let's talk about integrating your child's school, though. Let's talk about integrating the neighborhood that you live in. Let's talk about sharing some of those resources when we determine where hospitals go, or who gets public parks, or whose roads get fixed. That's where this work really gets personal. It doesn't do anything to say, in the hood somewhere, don't shoot a Black person down without consequence. That's should be the easiest thing, though clearly it's not, or we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I personally have struggled with my own motivation as it relates to this, because, it's been frustrating that it took the lynching of George Floyd for people particularly for white folks, to be like, maybe y'all were right. Didn't you guys say there was something going on wrong over here in our country? And in many ways, that's been even more defeating as a Black person, that all that we've been through, that all the words that we've said, all the protests that we've had, all the data that we have that shows these systems of oppression impact Black people in every way that we live. They've been unheard, they've been unanswered, and they didn't believe us. And now it seems like, like we're seeing, there's this new opportunity that we've never seen before, that white people are talking about racism, that other people of color are talking about anti-Blackness, that, NASCAR is doing something for the first time, not allowing Confederate flags, a huge step, I guess, for them. But I think that we're all really weary about this country's ability for true change. But I think we also have some hope. We have to have hope in our lives that, things are going to get better. I want to hear from you all, folks who are in this work every day. I think that you guys are some of our thought leaders of our time. How do we stay, as Black folks, how do we stay inspired and committed to this fight in such a period that I think can be really kind of disheartening as today?
Staying inspired is tough. I'm not even gonna lie. It's like, we're still we're dealing with COVID, which of course, because it's a health issue, is gonna affect Black folks more than anybody else, like any other health issue. We're protesting, we still gotta work. while we're protesting, it's like, it does get hard to stay inspired, especially when you're still seeing tragic shootings happening. Like in the midst of this, there have been more deaths in the midst of all of this, right? And they almost get a little overshadowed because unfortunately, like we only move oftentimes when it's a Black man that's killed, right? And that's built in like a whole patriarchal situation that dates back centuries and thousands of years. But there was a specific reason why George Floyd got everybody motivated, right? And it was because of body type, it was because of how he looked, it was because of a lot of things. And there was the reason why certain people didn't get up or didn't make a peep when Breonna was killed, right? And I think oftentimes we talk about hope, but I like to talk about like hopelessness, because hopelessness, I think, is oftentimes the biggest motivating thing for Black folks. It's like the making a way out of no way, like realizing that you actually had no way and made a way. And I think a lot of us are trying to keep our, it's hard because you're balancing hopelessness and trying to stay inspired in hopelessness. Because it's like, it's easy to, it's not easy, but it's like, oh, I hope things get better. But when you say that, do you actually take an action usually when you say, I hope this thing happens? Usually hope leads to inaction. And so I'm more inspired about, how we got kind of hopeless, honestly. And people had enough. And people who never got up to march started marching. People who never showed up to protest started protesting. People who never wanted to read started reading again, and started to learn. And so I think the biggest way, like, to keep us inspired during this time is to look at the wisdom of those who are still with us, the Cornel West, the Angela Davis. If Angela Davis is excited, we all have to be excited. And I just remember the day she said she was excited. This had to be about 6 or 7 days ago. I think a lot of us were like drained. It was tough. I think it was like day 13 of protesting. Many of us had been protesting. Some of my friends have gotten hurt in the protests, like seriously, severely hurt in the protests. And it just was tough. And like to see her be so inspired and still out there and still fist in the air, it's like, this is what revolution looks like. And it's being televised. And for the first time, the world is behind us. Like it isn't just, and I mean, like I remember when Trump threatened the military, it was a scary night. That was a really, really scary night for activists, because it was like, y'all, this is it. Like, we're gonna have to fight the military. But the next day, all 50 states rose up and was like, enough is enough. And then the day after that, it was hundreds of thousands of people around the world marching for a Black person. And I think those are like, when I get to those moments, or when we get to those moments, we have to pull from that to remember, like, we gotta have us, but the world has us right now too, and to lean into that. And yeah, I honestly, I think that's where we're at, like with staying inspired, is like we just have to keep leaning into, and a lot of the symbolic changes are stupid, but I appreciate it. But also, like, look how much has changed in the last 3 weeks since we started this. I mean, it's laws changing. We started yelling defund the police. People were like, yeah, I can't do that. And states started defunding the police. Like, that was something that was unimaginable 10 years ago, unimaginable 5 years ago, unimaginable last year, unimaginable last month. And now we are watching school systems take cops out of their schools. And we are watching these things happen in real time. And so I think with each small inch, that's what we have to hold on to stay inspired.
Nikole, what do you want to add to that around how we can stay inspired and committed to the struggle?
I'm just going to warn y'all probably going to hear some loud firecrackers. I had to mute myself because the neighborhood. But so it's an interesting question, because my primary motivation is rage. I am mostly find that absolute sense of outrage that we're still having to fight like this about the same things. If you study history, we've been fighting police brutality, we've been fighting poverty, we've been fighting, unequal education, like everything that we're fighting, we have been fighting since 1619. And so I feel a lot of rage that people who has been on this land this long is still trying to just be treated like full citizens. With that said, I also think a lot about our ancestors who had to fight for a world they knew they would not see, and to have the faith that they were building a world that George and you and myself would inhabit one day, where we have rights and advantages that they couldn't imagine. It doesn't mean that we don't still struggle, but we then owe it to our future generations to keep fighting for a world that we also will not see. And I think that that's really critical. The role of Black Americans, it's not a role that we ever asked for in this country, has been a role of struggle, has been a role of fighting, not just to produce a greater democracy for ourselves, but for all people. I think about last week, when the Supreme Court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act applied when it came to employment to gay, lesbian, transgender, and queer Americans. That Civil Rights Act was born on the backs of Black resistance and freedom struggles. And when Black people fought for rights, we never only fought for our own rights. And almost every great expansion of rights in this country, when the Supreme Court ruled on gay marriage, they used the 14th Amendment, which was passed after the end of slavery, to ensure Black people had citizenship and equal protection under the law. So this has been our role, and it's a tremendous legacy. And we don't have a choice. I feel like, I'm not a hopeful person. I've never felt that hope is a useful emotion for me, though I appreciate other people who have it. But I feel like we just don't have a choice. We have to get out here and fight, whether we're going to build the world that we need to build or not. We don't have a choice. And so the motivation for me is never a difficult thing. Finding healthy ways to deal with the trauma might be a difficult thing. I certainly drank too much bourbon, but finding the fire to fight, that's easy. It's built in. That's who our people are.
It's so much of what drives me as well, Nikole, with the work that I do at Black AIDS Institute, the work that we do in trying to end HIV. It's the rage. It is the kind of the audacity that folks allow us that are not caring about our lives. The statistics that we see, whether it's expected that 1 in 2 Black gay men will acquire HIV within their lifetime. Who's talking about that? That is an atrocity, and that is the responsibility of us to kind of lead. And so that is my motivation as well. So you're in good company. Last week we had our series on trauma and on mental wellness. And we decided to start the series with that to try and figure out some of those kind of mechanisms so that we can make sure our minds are right, that our hearts are right, so we can fight this fight. So I've been trying to journal, I've been meditating, I've been kind of doing this stuff from last week. That's been really helpful. So this is my last question to you all before we close this out. Over the course of this current administration, the rallying cry of our communities has been resist. We've seen it on posters. We've heard it in chants on the street. It's been about resist, resist, resist. How have you as an individual, as a Black person, been resisting this year? And how do you think the Black collective can resist in the various ways we show up in our Blackness, with the various capacities and the privileges that we have? How do we collectively continue to resist and really create change for our folks?
Okay, I'll start. I am a practicing abolitionist, and I believe that resistance is not just in terms of I think it's in terms of how we view every construct. So gender is a construct. And so I resist that every day. I identify as non-binary. And when people ask me, what does that mean? I tell them the truth about what it means. It means that, like my grandmother told me a few months ago before she passed away, she looked at me and said, you never were really a boy, but you never were really a girl. You just sat somewhere in the middle, and that's what you are. So if you comfortable, you can now go tell that to the world, because I've always known it about you, right? And so for me, it was like, if a 78-year-old Black woman could get that and saw that when I was a child, that's where I sat, then I have to do the work now to resist the fact that when I look in the mirror, I have to pretend to be this thing that I'm not. And so I think that's like personal resistance, right? But I also think about how, many ways we're ingrained or we're colonized in many ways, right? So when we say like abolish the police, that's a dream. That's like dreaming of, that's like when the ancestors were saying abolish slavery, right? That was a dream that they may have had for their grandchildren, a dream that they may not have seen, right? That's something we are dreaming about that we may know we can't put into immediate practice, but we can work towards that, right? But we're colonized in many ways to move out of the way when a white person is walking up, right? Like, oh, like, because they don't say excuse me. Make them say excuse me. Like, it's little ways that you can abolish things. And like, so it's like you have big ways you can abolish things and resist, but then you have little ways you can also abolish things and resist. And so I don't know if you ever just stood still like while a white person tried to get by, but they become like contortionists because like excuse me is just something they're not used to saying. And so typically I just don't move now and I let them contort. And then when they're done contorting, I make sure I tell them, you could have just said, excuse me. And then I go back to doing whatever. But those are the ways that we have to start resisting in those little ways, right? They call them like microaggressions. I don't necessarily like that term because I don't think we need to discuss like the proximity of race, of like where it's happening. But even if it's happening as a micro thing, it is a macro issue, but we can still make adjustments in our day-to-day life to resist those small moments and those small interactions that we're having where our brains have been so colonized to allow them to do these things to us that we just stop doing them. It takes time, it takes practice, it's not easy, but the more you stop feeding into those things and the respectability politics, and I mean, listen, I got a nose ring, tattoos on my hand, and I was like, if somebody in corporate America don't want me, they just don't want me, but that's stupid, right? Like I shouldn't have to look a certain way to get a job because at the end of the day, I'm Black, so you probably not gonna want me to have it anyway. No shade. So I might as well at least be who I am and look how I am. And I think those are the ways that we can resist, like being who we are and as Black as we want to be, wherever we want to show up.
Come on, uniquely and unapologetically Black. Nikole, close us out, please, with how you resist and how you would encourage us as a Black collective to resist in our various ways.
Yeah, so I had to piggyback on George. You kind of took what I was going to start with, which is the way I present in the world is resistance, clearly. I am a Black woman who works at the New York Times, who has fiery red hair, who has tattoos, who wears bright red lipstick and animal print every day, who talks the way that I talk, who chooses to live in a poor Black neighborhood by choice, who sends my child to a poor Black school by choice, and who writes the Blackest shit that you'll find in the New York Times. And I refuse to shut up. That's why I'm constantly being attacked by right-wing media, because I don't present. I'm not apologetic. I'm going to say what needs to be said, how I think it needs to be said. And I am an open advocate for our people. So to me, resistance is easy. We were born to resist. We were born into a country that didn't want us, that wishes we weren't here, and that has never treated us as full citizens. So I think we come out of the womb being born, right? When we look at infant mortality rates among Black women being the highest in the Western world, when we look at Black women's maternal mortality rates, just the fact that we are born into this world is an act of resistance. So to me, that's what we were born to do. That is how we thrive, is to not accept the conditions that they want us to accept. And even if we don't feel like we win the battles, we win little daily battles every single day. And fighting back is how we maintain our humanity, how we don't allow them to confine who we are. So I think our community resists in all the ways that we have always resisted. We resist, like George said, by not getting off the sidewalk, but we also resist by marching in the streets. We resist by excelling in school if we can, right? Like there's so many ways. We don't always have to feel that resistance has to be something outward and grand. It's simply by thriving in our own communities and doing things to liberate ourselves in our community every day. I think I come from a very humble working class family. Nobody in my family lives like me. And the way that they resist is to try to raise their kids and live their lives and defy all of the obstacles that are put in our path. And I think that's how most of us as a community resist every day. And that's a powerful thing.
Thank you all so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I've been juiced about it. I've been so excited to have this conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to the viewers that are here with us. We appreciate you coming back for week 2 or joining us for the first time this week. Please make sure you follow us at BlackAids to stay informed. Follow us on social media. You can follow us, go to our website at blackaids.org. Tomorrow, we're going to have a social media recap. And so we have Black AIDS Institute's Policy and Organizing Manager, Max Boykin, and SNAPCO, who will be talking through some of this conversation as well. They're on the ground in Atlanta, doing the work, protesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing more on social media about that. Everybody who's watching today is going to receive amazing virtual goodie bags. You know, we can't be in person, but you know, we like to flag and gifts out. It's the Black thing to do. So you guys are going to receive this email tomorrow with exclusive The Blacker the Plan offers, discounts, and resources. I want to give a huge thank you to our brand partners who are contribute to the this virtual goodie bag. We have the Nappy Head Club, an online retail destination for all things Black health, Black liberation, and Black support related. We have Black and Well magazine, a digital wellness publication and platform exclusively focused on Black health, and the Literacy Shop, an online and Black-owned children's bookstore focused on building literacy, self-esteem, confidence, and the reading aptitude of children of color. Thank y'all for the support of Black AIDS Institute. You know, every day we do this work from an unapologetically Black point of view. And your support for Black AIDS Institute has mean so much. That support, that financial support, no matter the size, has a huge impact for our ability to ensure that all Black lives matter. That's Black trans lives, that's Black POS lives, that's Black queer lives, Black femme lives, that really all Black lives are worth saving and worth advocating for and ensuring that we have our freedom. Thank y'all again. I'm so grateful. Have a great rest of your day. And we look forward to connecting next week for episode 3, our final episode of The Blacker the Plan.